Happy high quality Halloween. Woo, so spooky. I'm Spooky Nick, and that is even spookier John. Woo.
Ooh,
Yeah, okay.
very
Wow.
spooky.
You're in the holiday spirit.
Too spooky.
Actually, one could argue that Halloween is not a holiday since you do not have work off.
This is true.
Which,
It's not a true holiday.
that's right, if you're an adult, that's a pretty important aspect of holidays.
I mean, it is a holiday in all our hearts, but,
Indeed.
you know, one thing that's nice about it that we don't have to worry about is a title. We already have it.
We do?
High quality Halloween.
Works for me.
Got that
So,
out of the way.
easy. Saves us 2 to 3 minutes at the end.
Yep.
So my apartment building has kids in it that live
Sure.
here with their parents, obviously. And my apartment gave out flyers, said, if you want to have trick or treaters, put this up in your door. And I was all for it. I'm like, hey, if I was a kid, I'd want to, get to as many places to get candy.
Sure.
So I go to the store. I get 2 bags of this orange Kit Kat and pumpkin Reese's mixture, and I buy 2 of them, so I have like 80 to 100 pieces, and I had 2 trick-or-treaters all night. So I have just a bowl of Reese's peanut butter cups and Kit Kat bars.
I mean, is that a problem, though? It sounds like it's not.
I mean, I'm not gonna eat it all. I'll probably bring it to work tomorrow,
All right.
as I'm sure everyone will. Their spare stuff.
Yeah.
But
There's a
let's
way to
give
solve that.
let's give a moment of silence here to the Kepler telescope.
Rest in
Fortunately,
peace.
its mission's coming to an end, so moment of silence, if you will. Thank you. Very, very important in the field of astronomical observation and the way we observe exoplanets. There will be many of successors planned and both already in orbit right now,
Mm-hmm.
based on the wonderful work of Kepler. So it's 9 years
Yep.
of work since 2009. Did quite a bit.
It did. And a fun little bit of a corollary to Kepler that involves its particular scientific data in conjunction with the Gaia telescope, which is in orbit, still operating. I'm not entirely sure when it was launched. I want to say in the last few years. But it returns data packages of measurements on the momentum and the location of stars within the Milky Way galaxy. It's effectively serving as a means to map our galaxy more completely and in 3 dimensions than anything before it. And the reason I found out about this, in part, other than just being kind of tapped into the astronomy sort of news cycle, I guess, is there was a video that was released on YouTube that deals with this exact spacecraft as well as Kepler, because Kepler serves as, you mentioned, the exoplanet study, and the way that Kepler goes about determining an exoplanet, whether an exoplanet is around a general area, is by looking at that exoplanet's star and detecting the changes in brightness as an exoplanet crosses in front of that star with respect to the field of view of the Kepler telescope. So, with that in mind, there's a video on YouTube that goes into detail about this from the American Museum of Natural History, which I believe you visited in New York.
I did.
So, a little bit of a tie-in from your couple weeks back. You were there a
Yeah.
couple weeks back, right?
They have a wonderful space exhibit. If you ever get a chance to go there.
I would imagine
I mean, the
so.
whole place is pretty impressive. Just the way, kind of like I talked before about it, the way it's set up is very educational, and it doesn't have like really long quips, so it's pretty easy for you to just stop and read something.
Yeah,
Very,
it's good.
very unique.
Good and
Anyway,
important for museums to be user friendly.
oh,
But
indeed.
The name of this particular video, if anybody is interested in taking a look at it, because it is interesting, is it's from the American Museum of Natural History's YouTube channel called "The Milky Way as You've Never Seen It Before," and it was released only a couple days ago, 4 days to be specific. But the talk given by one astrophysicist, Jackie Faherty, probably pronouncing her last name wrong, but she gave a talk on some of the simulations that she had done, and in conjunction with the American Museum of Natural History, to simulate the movement of hundreds of thousands of stars within the Milky Way galaxy to kind of give a really unique perspective on our place within our own galaxy. And what's even more interesting is all of the data from Gaia and Kepler is incorporated into an archive that is accessible to the public, as are the programs that these same scientists and astrophysicists use to simulate these events of star transit over hundreds of millions of years. So feasibly, if you wanted to look into it, we're so inclined, you could do the same kind of simulations that these scientists are doing and examine particular stars and how they move in relation to our own solar system and galaxy. Just a fun little citizen science project there for anybody who might be having their interest piqued.
My interest is thoroughly piqued.
I can tell.
I mean,
you sound so excited.
I already knew about it. That's why I'm like. Anyway.
In any event, just a minor aside to the sad and tragic end of Kepler, which did a good job, did a good service for detecting exoplanets, drastically improved our understanding and of the number of exoplanets and where they're located. But
how we get there is a different story.
Yeah, it'll be missed. Moving on.
Let's move on to, how about your beer? You got a beer happening?
I do have a beer
going on right now. Yeah,
it's not a spooky beer apparently.
Oh,
unfortunately,
you couldn't find a spooky beer in time.
I mean, depending on your tastes, it could be considered spooky. So
okay, my interest is piqued.
Again, nice packaging. I'll comment on that. It's kind of got a the Holstein standard cow, brown or black and white spotted cows.
Yeah.
Imagine that on a can, except red, and they kind of basically just look like amoebas on a white background.
So it's the pattern of that cow, but red and black.
Red and white.
Red and white. Okay.
Yeah, but essentially the same thing. Now, the beer itself is a Mango Margarita Slush IPA.
A what now?
Mango Margarita Slush IPA.
Okay. Can you tell me how to find this? Because I feel like I have to try this for myself.
Well, it's brewed in Stratford, Connecticut, and distributed through Brooklyn, New York. So
Stratford,
if you're lucky,
Connecticut,
and you can find that this is distributed to your own local
Brooklyn, New York. Okay.
Local beer store or liquor
store,
or even craft beer bar.
Craft beer.
It's made by a brewery called Omni Pollo. So,
and how many stars would you give this beer?
How many what?
Stars.
How many stars?
Yeah, or I guess steins. How many steins out of 5?
Steins out of 5?
Yeah.
I think I'd probably give it a 3.5, maybe 3 3/4, 3.75.
So, little above average.
It's a little above average. It's certainly unique in the packaging and flavor department, but it's a reasonable IPA that has some nice mango flavor to it. Mango doesn't really come through all that well in most beverages. Here you can kind of get it, but it's more just your standard type of tropical fruit note. And there's a little bit of hops flavor to it, but nothing in major play. The one thing I will say is that there is some interesting interplay with the hops flavor and mango flavor and the aftertaste. And the mouthfeel of it is not unlike a slush. It's a little hazy and almost kind of pulpy, but not really. It gives you that kind of feel,
so
though. It's
weird.
not like you're really descriptive, I know. But it's a hazy beer, and with hazy beers come that kind of more full mouthfeel as opposed to drinking like a Budweiser that's basically like drinking piss water.
So what was this beer called?
It was a Omnipollo Mango Margarita Slush IPA.
Oh my fucking. Okay,
And
I have to actively find this now because I'm too curious.
the name is Oaxaca, I believe.
Oaxaca.
Not unlike the Mexican region.
That is spelled not how you think it is.
No. OAXACA.
Okay,
Oaxaca.
so start off with some sadder news. Obviously, this.
Certainly glad I'm drinking a beer for this.
Yeah. For the past few days, there have been two shootings. One a little kind of fell to the wayside as far as coverage, is because it happened pretty much right before the pipe bombs were being delivered. So more recently, obviously, is the shooting at the Tree of Life Congregation Synagogue in Pittsburgh. And I'm not even gonna say either of these piece of shit's names. I'm just gonna call them gunmen because that's all I care to know them as.
Not worth it.
No. So the full story, condensed, obviously. The gunman entered the synagogue in the affluent Squirrel Hill neighborhood, shouting hate for Jews and killing worshippers for 20 minutes. And police were notified at 9:54 a.m. Eastern Time. So as the police entered the synagogue, they found victims who were already dead, and they were getting wounded survivors to safety, even as this asshole was still firing at them. 11 people were killed, 6 were injured, 2 congregation members, 2 police officers, and 2 SWAT team members. 2 of the officers have been released from the hospital. The other 2 are, one is in stable condition and the other is still in intensive care. So here are the names I would like you to remember and think about. And these are the 11 victims. Rose Mallinger, 97. Daniel Stein, 71. Melvin Wax, 88. Jerry Rabinowitz, 66. Cecil Rosenthal, 59, and his brother David Rosenthal, 54. Bernice Simon, 84, and her husband Sylvan Simon, 86. Joyce Finberg, 75. Richard Gottfried, 65, and Irvin Younger, 69. They were there for I believe it's a naming ceremony. It happens when a child is born. They were just there following their faith and doing, I'm not too familiar with how this ceremony works, but it's just, it tears you up to just think about, not just this incident, but most of them, how people are just going about their day. Like, we're not in a war zone, People don't ever think about it. People don't go out and prepare, nor should they have to. This is supposed to be the greatest country in the world. And you can't even go to church, it seems like, without being in danger. Now, the shooting that happened in Kroger, it's kind of a little lengthier story with more levels to it. Like, the gunman who shot up the synagogue was just a straight up a-hole. Like, everybody, if you look at his internet history, he writes all this anti-Semitic crud and conspiracy theories everywhere. It actually got a website's domain named revoked. I think it was called Gab. Got taken down by the what do you call it? It was GoDaddy, I know for a fact, who took the domain away. And then he, of course, the guy who owns it wrote some crap about free speech. Like, dude, come on.
You're not making anything better here.
You're letting anti-Semites write their hateful crap on your website, and you're going to complain about free speech. Oh, whatever.
Yeah.
So the story was kind of put on the back page by the media, like I said, because the male pipe bombs started happening the same day. Maybe it was the next day. I'm not 100% sure. Once again, I'm not going to say this dude's name. He's just gunman. So on October 24th, the gunman tried to get into First Baptist Church of Jeffersontown, a neighborhood of Louisville, Kentucky. And First Baptist Church is a predominantly African American church. The Jeffersontown police chief, Sam Rogers, told reporters that surveillance video showed the gunman yanking on the church doors. Now, the really scary thing is if he had come to the church an hour earlier, 70 or more people had gathered there at the church, and the door would probably have been unlocked. He could have gone in there and killed up to 70 people. So the gunman, finding that the place was locked, went to a nearby Kroger grocery store. He walked into the Kroger, pulled a gun, and shot 69-year-old Maurice Stallard in the back of the head and then shot him several more times. The gunman then went outside and shot 67-year-old Vicki Lee Jones, who also died from multiple gunshot wounds. A Louisville resident, Ed Harrell, was crouched in the Kroger parking lot behind a car, clutching his own revolver. The gunman walked by him and said, "Don't shoot me, I won't shoot you, whites don't shoot whites." So there's more information about the Wednesday attack and its alleged perpetrator have emerged. There are indications that the gunman chose his targets because of the color of their skin. Federal investigators are looking into the fatal shootings as potential civil rights violations such as hate crimes, said Russell Coleman, who is the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Kentucky. There's more to this gunman who has which will just make you a little more infuriated that he was able to go buy an AR-15 and a Glock. The gunman's ex-wife, who is black, actually, said in court records that he had called her a, quote, N-word bitch. He has a lengthy criminal record, including being convicted of domestic assault for punching his father in the face and lifting his mother by the neck. His convictions did not prevent him from legally owning firearms. So another white man who has a history of violence and violent behavior is able to obtain an assault rifle and wanted to go into a predominantly black church and kill up to 70 people, but took consolation in going to a grocery store. Again, just two people just going about their day as normal, just gunned down in a bunch of senseless racist violence.
Whites don't shoot whites. I think that's the biggest takeaway from this, is we're dealing with a man who is the most pure form of racist.
Yeah. So I guess if he goes to war somewhere, like in World War II, he just wouldn't have shot anybody if he went there? Because whites don't shoot whites?
I guess not. These type of things, hate crimes, call them what they are such a black mark on what our society is today, or has been allowed to become by certain individuals who have yet to really show any kind of backbone in the face of shootings like this or hate crimes. Not just shootings, but any kind of hatred directed at a specific group or ethnicity or race of people. It's not something that's easy to find a solution for or find a means of dealing with effectively, because I can't say that I'm a person who's fully against, get rid of all guns because guns are the problem. It's not guns that are the problem. It's the attitudes surrounding them and the attitudes of the individuals who have access to them. And there are always going to be outliers for certain situations, but when you deal with as many mass shootings as the United States has even in the last 2 years, it's absurd. And it's something that the only solution possible for such a broad strokes kind of situation is to have both sides of the aisle, in as cliche a term as that may be, for having a bipartisan act to go through with this. Is there needs to be bipartisan agreement on things, and there hasn't been up till this point.
But there's one common denominator across, a lot of countries. And that the United States is by far and away the one country where most of these mass shootings happen.
This is true.
And the common denominator, the one thing where we stand out above other countries, is our lax gun laws. And state to state, it's different. States can control they have their own gun laws. If they want to have an assault weapons ban, that's okay, unless they take them to court. If you want to have more background checks, that's fine. If you don't have any background checks whatsoever, like, have you ever seen videos of like people who go to gun shows to see how easy it is to get certain weapons?
Oh, sure. And those gun shows could very well be in these states that have extremely lax gun laws.
Now, I'm not Mr. Get Off Guns Away, but there are just certain guns that should not be used anywhere that's not a war zone. Like, I don't know what you're going to do with an AR-15.
I mean, I've shot an AR-15 before.
It's the gun of choice of a lot of these shootings that have happened. So many of them have been that gun.
It's the most popular firearm out of pretty much anything, at least in terms of a rifle, just because it's so customizable, and it's basically like you can put mods on it like a damn car and spend oodles of cash on fancy scopes and extended magazines and silencers and everything else under the sun. And I will say, hey, if you want to shoot something like that and do marksmanship, great. But guns are meant to be used for killing. That is their purpose. Not defense, killing. Period. That's what they're for. I understood that growing up with shotguns in our house that we would take out to my grandparents' farm and go hunting for ducks or pheasant, sometimes even deer. Very rarely, because there weren't very many deer out in the plains in Nebraska. But in any event, we used guns for hunting, and we understood what they were for. And if you're using them as a tool, as they were originally intended, for that purpose, the tool purpose being to kill, you have a different understanding of it. It's not a matter of, owning a gun is a symbol of manhood or virility or something like that, which seems so much to be a tie-in to the machismo that the NRA seems to market and gun shows are all about. You got these macho guys and, bikers and the stereotypical image of men going to buy guns. Something needs to be squared away, and not just with gun laws, but in the whole mentality surrounding the weapons and firearms industry.
I mean, it's easy to to blame guns because we see those statistics, you know?
Sure.
And to an extent, that's true. But the other thing is obviously the culture around racism, anti-Semitism, misogyny, people who have severe mental health, you know? How do you prevent people who shouldn't have guns from getting those guns? Because you don't know what's going to make a person go out and shoot people, you know? There are a bunch of racist and anti-Semitic dicks out there on the internet who probably never even commit such a heinous act. But how do you know that they're not going to, you know?
How do you know in another 10 or 15 years that somebody won't reach some breaking point and walk up into a church or a Kroger and do the same thing these guys did?
I mean, this guy who in Louisville had history and was convicted of physical assault and domestic abuse.
And yet he still had a firearm that was semi-automatic and could kill up to 70 people easily.
And he obtained it legally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, there should be obvious limits. First of all, obvious limits right there. If you've committed a violent crime, you know, in my opinion, you shouldn't be able to own a gun. That's not up to me to decide if it's
agree.
A gun, period. Like any guns, period. I would say any guns, period.
Oh, yeah. And that goes back to your point about the fact that we may have certain federal regulations in place, but ultimately gun laws are a state-by-state law. They vary by states. And in particular, you take the example of this guy in Kentucky at Kroger. I can guarantee you Kentucky's gun laws are a hell of a lot more relaxed than, like, California's or New York State's.
No,
so
you're definitely right.
You know, hey, Mitch McConnell, fucking turtle, get your shit together in Kentucky.
He actually had a statement about this. Of course, he was speaking at the Federalist Society.
Of course.
Right-wing organization. And he did say, you know, there's no room for racist hate crimes like this, and he felt that they should seek the death penalty on the guy, which, you know, obviously that's going to happen, whether you're for or against the death penalty. I mean, personally, I think some people definitely deserve it, but at the same time, people always argue it's more expensive than just life in prison. And my response to that would be, I don't care. You're going to selectively complain about cost. Like, this is a clear-cut situation. It was premeditated and everything. That should be the
violence.
That should be the death penalty.
Past.
Right.
He had a plan to go into a church and shoot tens of people originally, and then just said, "Oh well, I can't get into the church. Fuck it, I'm going to go to a Kroger and shoot some other innocent people."
Like
this is a man who does not deserve life in prison, and I'm as much of a pacifist as you could probably be reasonably in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't particularly like the idea of killing people, but in certain instances, there's a no tolerance policy for this shit. And when we start dealing with violent hate crimes like these two in Pittsburgh and Kentucky, they've crossed a line. They crossed a line a long time ago, and they should pay for that.
Right. I mean, it's in cases where it's just so obviously premeditated, like that's the time I think you whip out the death penalty. But other than that,
I think even
no.
the federal prosecutors who are working the case for this Pittsburgh gunman are seeking the death penalty as their first, their main focus.
Good. Dude's a piece of crap.
Yeah.
So this other guy will get the same treatment, although I don't know if Pennsylvania has the death penalty.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We'll see. But in any event.
All right, let's move along. Would you like to do I know you had something on interferometers.
I do.
Would you like to go over that?
On interferometers as a gateway into a particular topic.
Oh, it's a gateway topic. All right.
It's a gateway topic. I think that's probably the first time you'll ever hear interferometers referenced as a gateway
My
topic.
interest is piqued.
Well, maybe into quantum mechanics, but anyway, this does deal with quantum mechanics. There is a paper released, or published, I should say, today or this week about the first observation of antimatter wave interference.
What is antimatter wave interference?
Antimatter wave interference is essentially replicating the famous experiment that showed the wave particle duality completed by one Louis de Broglie in 1924. You might, if you're into physics or have taken maybe some upper level physics course at university, you might recognize the name de Broglie because it is a name for the de Broglie wavelength, which is present in a large number of quantum mechanical calculations. Most all of them deal with, or at least in terms of waves, the de Broglie wavelength is a very important figure in quantum mechanics. So before we get into the discussion of exactly what the antimatter or the significance of antimatter wave interference is, how much do you know about interferometers, Nick?
Nothing.
That's kind of what I figured. And I'm assuming that's what the majority of the audience knows about interferometers as well.
It sounds like
So-
something that measures lasers. That's typically my go-to when I hear like some kind of ometer. I'm like, oh, that's something with lasers probably.
You are absolutely correct.
Wait, really?
Yes.
Huh.
So,
Wow, my
Generally-
theory works, huh?
generally, the most basic form of an interferometer is what's known as a Michelson interferometer or a Michelson laser interferometer.
Michelson was an alumnus of my alma mater, Case Western. Him and Morley found the speed of light.
There you go. Maybe this same Michelson has something to do with these.
I think so. They had a
19th century Albert Michelson.
Yep,
There you go.
that's the guy.
Same man. What do you know? Ohio done us proud.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I'm looking at what an interferometer is right now. It doesn't surprise me if he had something to do with its invention.
Fun little small world tangent there.
Right. Very small.
Anyway, so what is an interferometer? Well, an interferometer uses lasers, 2 of them, in fact. And if you're familiar with the LIGO laboratories, which we've
Yes.
talked about in the past,
Many
those are
times.
just giant interferometers, really large. And interferometers use a couple of lasers or a laser beam that is split into 2 different paths that travel a certain distance depending on what you're trying to measure, whether it be gravitational waves or some movement within a particular sample that you're analyzing. They're used to make very small, precise measurements based around the quantum mechanical properties of light and light in its wave form specifically for a general interferometer. So these 2 laser beams that are split from a single laser beam at the source are sent down opposing arms of an interferometer set at a 90-degree angle to each other in the Michelson interferometer instance. And these arms are then bounced back by mirrors on the end of either of them, and the laser beam is recombined, and then interference effects are examined to see if any change in either of the arms has occurred, which, if in the case of gravitational waves, if there's a gravitational wave that passes through this interferometer, then there will be a noticeable change in the laser beam. Normally, the laser beam, undisturbed, will return back interfering wavelengths of light, which will produce essentially a flat line. But if there's any disturbance in those, then there will be no interference effects, or there will be some sort of additive effect in the waves, and those waves will create a corresponding blip or a chirp in the case of gravitational waves in the signal. So that's generally very brief overview of how an interferometer works. Using laser light, it's able to detect very precise, small measurements in tiny, tiny subjects.
So in this case, it was used for anti-mass uh, interference.
Antimatter interference.
Matter. Oops.
Now we're going to get a little more quantum mechanical here for a second, because this particular type of interferometer, which is not a Michelson interferometer, but a Talbot-Lau interferometer, which is slightly different in construction. We'll get to that in a second.
So is it different because it doesn't use a laser since it's measuring a different medium, or is it still measuring like light interference?
So it's still measuring interference effects, but not from light, from particles, because in quantum mechanics, well, the main postulates of quantum mechanics is the wave-particle duality. So with that being said, waves can exist as particles, and particles can exist as waves. The form of light that is a particle is called a photon, and if it's a wave, it's just a light wave. So with waves, you can have interference effects, as we just discussed with laser light. You can also have interference effects with particles, hence the particle-wave duality. So with this particular experiment that was set up, there were single positrons, which is the antiparticle to an electron having a positive charge as opposed to a negative charge. And those positrons were accelerated or shot through this particular interferometer with a certain energy range in a monochromatic beam, which means it's a single light source, or a single color is a way to think of it. Hence the monochromatic, where you would normally have fully chromatic light, you shine it through a prism, you get the rainbow. With monochromatic light, not unlike a laser, it's red or green or whatever particular wavelength of light that is set at. So with this particular setup, positrons from the beta decay of a sodium radioactive source, sodium-22 specifically, were implanted on a tungsten film and emitted with kinetic energy of about 3 electron volts, reasonably small, to accelerate the particles in the direction of this interferometer. The slower positrons were then accelerated up to 16 kiloelectron volts using electrostatics, the pre-system for the interferometer. And then this particular beam was sent through a couple of collimators, which confine the beam down to a smaller size, and then through a couple of silicon nitride diffraction gratings, which are used to essentially form slits that these single positrons could flow through, and then were detected by a couple of detectors, one called an emulsion detector, which is essentially used to capture, in the most literal sense, the positrons, or capture a indication of where those positrons strike after they travel through these diffraction gratings, and then a radioactive decay detector that was used to see some ancillary effects from the decay of these positrons once they contacted this particular emulsion detector. This emulsion detector you can think of as essentially kind of one of those bug traps that has a sticky surface to it, or a very thin gelatinous goo on the front that serves as a trap for these positrons that are incoming to that particular detector. And that's about as literal as you could get with it, because it's basically just a bunch of gel that they take off and do some analysis on afterward to determine where the positrons hit. So pretty literal analogy. But the function of this is to produce or determine if there are interference effects within antimatter. We've seen interference effects for hundreds of years, since 1924 when de Broglie did his original experiment with the famous double slit experiment, which if you've ever been in a physics course that deals with quantum mechanics, you've probably heard of. If not, the double slit experiment is essentially using a laser beam shown through slits, two parallel slits, vertical slits, that are separated by a small distance and are very small in width, that normally if you had a wave going through these slits, you would see destructive and constructive interference effects on the opposite side of a fluorescent screen that would pick up on the back side of these slits. And if you covered up one of those slits and you assumed that you had a particle of light, a single photon going through that slit, then you would see just one column of effect from that, or a response from that particular photon. So, feasibly, if you had that one slit covered up and you saw only one line from a laser beam shining through that, and then you uncovered both slits, you would think that if the nature of light was purely particle in nature or wave in nature, if it was purely particle in nature, then you would see two vertical lines, because your particle would, or you'd see one where your particle would go through just one or the other, and over time you would see the two lines add up because your particle would only have two slits to go through, right?
Right.
Incorrect.
What?
Even if you shine a laser beam and have one photon enter your interferometer or your experiment at any given time with a double slit, you will always see interference effects, such is the particle and wave nature of light.
No.
In very brief explanation. Now, we had never shown this before with antimatter, partly because antimatter is difficult to deal with and keep alive in our universe primarily composed of regular matter. There is an antiparticle to every particle that we have in the standard model of physics, but those particles are considerably short-lived, even compared to the short lifetimes of certain other particles that we produce in particle colliders like the Large Hadron Collider and others in the past. So the significance of this experiment in using this particular interferometer and particular setup and experimental results, reducing the noise from surrounding air and the system that this interferometer was placed in under vacuum, reducing the noise and doing the data analysis for this particular experiment is significant because it shows that the double slit experiments carried out on electrons and showing the wave-particle duality exist for positrons. They are emitted as point-like particles, and they interact as de Broglie wavelengths with an interferometer and are eventually detected as distinct spots in an emulsion detector. So, quantum mechanics holds for positrons in a double slit experiment. And it's paves the way for some future investigations into further topics like antimatter gravity and low-intensity incoherent beams used for further investigations toward the fundamental understanding of systems containing antimatter, which, of course, plays a big part in understanding the makeup of the universe and why it's composed of matter and not antimatter, and possibly even dark energy and dark matter could come into play as well. So, some interesting things going on, and maybe a bit heady in terms of the discussion, but try to keep it as brief and lay person friendly as possible.
Man, I learned a lot.
That's all I can ask.
Antimatter just can't get with the program. It's got to do its own thing.
Nope.
And
At least it's not racist.
antimatter, anti the establishment.
Anti-disestablishmentarianism.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, so I will lighten the load. It's still science related, but it's not. Not that your thing was depressing, but there's not as much terminology going on in this story. Because this was interesting to read about, and I didn't know that this was a thing. I guess I'm not quite brushed up on my neuroscience as of late, but
can't say that I am either.
So Corey Miller, a neuroscientist at UC San Diego, has said that the field of neuroscience faces a problem with an animal that is in high demand in many neuroscience labs all over the world. These animals' small size, fast growth, and sophisticated social life were already enough to catch the eye of neuroscientists. This animal has now been genetically engineered to make their brains easier to image and to serve as models for neurological disorders such as autism or Parkinson's disease. So in response, the National Institutes of Health, NIH, plans to launch funding to expand research with this specific animal and establish.
My God.
Yes.
What animal could it be?
Oh, you'll find out shortly. And
Suspense is killing me.
Established researchers that use this animal are working together to help new labs get this animal. Miller's neuroscience lab started working with this animal in 2009. So it's been around for some time. But not as, around as it is. Okay, anyway.
It's not promiscuous.
No. Many of his colleagues studied a different animal, and it had no idea that this animal was very close to the current animal they were using as far as biology was concerned. Now, Miller says now all of these people want the animal he's been working with since 2009. And in a survey, Miller and his colleagues found that the number of U.S. research colonies of this animal jumped from 8 in 2009 to 27 today, totaling 1,900 of these animals across 40 principal investigators. Enthusiasm for this animal surged in 2009 when they became the first animal of their order shown to pass genetic modification to offspring in their sperm and eggs. Basically, what that means is they create some kind of a genetic modification in the animal, whether that could be at fertilization or genetic modification while the animal is very young or alive. And that trait gets passed on to its young. So this animal is known for its cooperative social behavior. They call to each other in back and forth conversations, and mated pairs share responsibility for rearing their young. They're smaller and easier to house than other animals of their order, and they give birth twice a year versus once every year or two, aiding generational genetic experiments. They mature and age more quickly than bigger animals of their order, thus speeding up studies of diseases that affect development and aging, and their brains are less furrowed, making it easier to image or record activity from its surface. Furrows being those little, you see a brain model, you see those little bends everywhere in the outside of the brain. That's what a furrow means. So what is this animal? Well, they hail from Brazil, standing at an average height of 7.28 to 7.4 inches, weighing in at 8.32 to 9.03 ounces. Its binomial name is Calathrex jaxus, the tiny, yet mighty, common marmoset.
That was probably the most hyped announcement for a pygmy marmoset
No,
I
the
think I've
common
ever.
marmoset. There's a difference.
Oh, really? Do tell.
Yes. So on remember the 5th of November at the Society of Neuroscience meeting in San Diego. That this is the one coming up now, not last year. This isn't. We're going to the future.
Okay.
There's going to be an announcement. So at this Society of Neuroscience meeting, Japanese neuroscientists will present updates on two transgenic efforts, marmosets with genetic mutations that in humans are linked to Parkinson's disease and the neurodevelopmental disorder Rett syndrome. And researchers hope that by watching disease progress in marmosets while analyzing their brains, they can identify mechanisms that cause illness in people and maybe find and test new therapies. And there's been somewhat of a marmoset race, if you want to call it that, because obviously breeding them takes some time and doing research with them does as well. So whoever can, breed the more marmosets and get ahead in the genetic modification of these brain disorders. So Japanese research got a huge leg up in 2014 for a 40 billion yen, 350 million US dollars, government initiative to map the marmoset brain. However, several US labs now have transgenic primates under development. In 2016, a team at NIH's National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke created marmosets with brain cells that fluoresce when excited. This is important in neuroimaging. Just to give you an example, for people with epilepsy, the ideal way to get a better idea of if there's a focus of a seizure or if it's more generalized is to inject an isotope into someone while they're having a seizure. The excitatory neurotransmitters and cells in the brain will have this isotope bound to them. And when you put that under a SPECT scan, you will see a concentration of activity. So it's the same thinking here by having this mutation of having a fluorescent protein that it will help you better monitor the marmoset's brain. So I'll get into why that's important now that you understand how that works. So this is a great tool for monitoring neural activity. In April, the first marmoset with this mutation implicated in some cases of autism had this mutation in the gene SHANK3 as it's known. Since it's implicated in some cases of autism, this will help to whether identify if this is in fact a gene that does implicate autism in children. There is, of course, these are animals. There's always some sort of resistance, public resistance to non-human primate research. Obviously being the main issue, as with all primate testing, you're genetically designing animals to be sick. Scientists, though, see no substitute for primate studies. Genetically, they're very similar to us. These marmosets are probably the easiest that we've found so far as genetic modification. Obviously, rats and mice are, pretty common in most, medical research. But when it comes to studying cognitive processes and other complex behaviors, some things you just need to do in a primate model. The study of mental illness requires an understanding of brain structures that don't exist in mice and rats. That does not mean that such research ignores the degree to which these primate experiments are acceptable to the genetic public, though. So, could a marmoset have helped in research that could save your life or someone else's life in the future? Who knows? But it seems like they're here to stay. So whether you like it or not, I know they're cute, but they're common. They wouldn't be called common if they weren't common.
It's true. They're not the rapper common though.
No, no. I had no idea that. At least I'd never heard of this when I was in school at all about marmoset research, like
I
at all.
definitely haven't heard of it. The only time I ever heard of or saw marmosets was at the zoo when they
Right.
had pygmy marmosets.
I knew that they would do research on macaque monkeys.
Yeah.
I've heard of that before, but marmosets I did not know. You know, this article and some of the papers I read have made it sound pretty ideal that, you know, this like rats and mice, they reproduce not as frequently as rodents, but more frequently than other primates used in research do. Obviously, a lot of the primate research we have so far has not necessarily been this, you know, genetically modifying them to have, you know, disorders, but has been, you know, more behavioral, so to speak. I'm not saying that that has not happened, though. There's a lot of potential here for, you know, where we can go with research into neuroscience.
Interesting stuff.
Now, to end this, at least I found this interesting, maybe to restore your faith in humanity.
I'm all for that at this point.
Um, the bookstore called October Books, a small radical bookshop in Southampton, England. I'm still not quite clear why it's called that.
It's England. We don't ask questions about those strange weirdos over there.
Good call. So October Books was moving to a new location down the street from where they currently work, but it faced a problem. How could it move its entire stock to the new spot without spending a lot of money or closing down for long? So, John, let me ask you, what would you have done?
Used children, slave labor.
You know, you're not far off. The
Can't
shop's
say I'm surprised.
the shop's clever solution put out a call for volunteers to act as a human conveyor belt.
Definitely not far off.
200 people showed up on the day of the move and formed a line 500 feet long from the stockroom of the old shop down the sidewalk and onto the shop floor of the new store. They moved 2,000 books in 1 hour. I do not know how long it took to completely move everything, if those 2,000 books were it or not. They even said they had people walking on the street see the action happening and joining the human conveyor belt. But I just, you know, if I saw an ad like that, I'm not sure I would have partaken in it. Unless, I mean, if it was like an okay weather day, maybe. Because you think you can stand out there for like an hour in the elements if it's like really cold, and like, no, couldn't do it.
Yeah, well, British people are generally just full of sadness, so rain and depressing weather is just part of their life.
I hope you didn't upset our British listeners.
Oh no, I definitely didn't. I know some of them personally, and they'll probably get a kick out of it and tell me about it.
Okay. Very, very well.
Fully aware of the people that listen to this and not afraid to rip the piss.
Ooh, I like it. Well, next time I still have a bit to talk about and concern to abiogenesis, the origins of life. I will give you no preview. I will just tell you that's what it is about.
All right.
Next week, obviously, the big story will be Election Day. What happened the previous day when we record?
Yep.
Well,
Do we want to shift things a day ahead and record on Election Day?
I don't know. See, the problem is we won't know, you know, the full results.
True. We'll have, well, at that point, if we record at the same time, we would have election results for the East Coast, but not necessarily the rest of the country, unless we wanted to stay up late, which,
I'm not about that.
yeah.
I
That's
think
supposed
it
to
would
be
be better just to do it next Wednesday when we'll have the clear picture. Because I mean, by the time the polls close in the West Coast and everything gets counting, even though like most toss-up states aren't aren't in
Yeah,
Pacific time.
I don't need to be up until 3 in the morning.
No, so we'll just do it the
Nope.
following day,
Yeah,
and then
that's fine.
we'll see how much we think it may take up a lot of time just thinking about it, but in actuality, I mean, we'll already know like what the outcome is, what the numbers are, because that's really what we care
Yeah.
about. And there's some high profile elections, obviously, that may go one way or the other that may or may not surprise us. So
Yeah.
that's what I think the game plan will be.
That'll be a large chunk of it, definitely.
Great. All right.
With that being said,
Hopefully no science news then.
if you live in the U.S., get your ass out and vote on November 6th,
Yes.
Tuesday.
I'm not going to tell you how to vote blue. I mean, how to vote.
However you want to vote, whether
Yes. If it's blue,
it's blue, red, left, right, whatever.
please vote blue.
Vote however you want.
Yeah,
but
vote however
vote.
you blue want to vote. Sorry,
It
I'll
sounds like
stop
an empty promise almost at this, or an empty kind of connotation at this point, because we're inundated, at least in the U.S., with the whole get out and vote. But seriously, it may feel like you have no power in anything when it comes to politics, but the one power that you do have is to vote. Even though there may be some shady shit going on in certain states with voter suppression or reorganizing of boundaries for particular states
gerrymandering.
that maybe a little heavy-handed on the Republican side. But regardless of that, the only way to fix it is to get somebody into that position of power who is willing to fight for what you want to see done, those policies, those actions that you want to see enacted in Congress and in the Senate
Right.
and the House of Representatives.
You can't change the system if you don't take part in it. That's just how it is.
We don't have any other way. You can call your representatives, you can vote, and you can do your best with what you're given, because I don't think anybody's up for full-scale anarchy.
I don't know. It might be kind of fun.
We don't have enough punk bands screaming anarchy in the U.S.
I mean, you think it'd be good, and then you watch movies like The Purge, and you think, oh, maybe not.
Maybe not. Maybe we don't need to have a nation who has the highest rate of mass shootings out of the entire world to go into full anarchy.
Right. Well, with that scary thought in mind, we hope you had a nice Halloween.
Perfect segue
Yes.
to Halloween.
Perfect.
We got a spooky podcast.
Very spooky.
High quality Halloween action
Some high quality scares happening
every day.
all day. All right, that is John.
That's Nick.
And have a high quality rest of your week.